Super Supportive by Sleyca. Chapter 167. Notion. My body becomes my assistant? Stuart asked. He was on the floor with his legs crossed, and though he sat in polite silence while Alden finished the word chain, he'd watched the whole casting process intently. I want to use it in gym and get the hang of it, but I've been thinking I might mix up having it active with having it inactive, so that I'm getting better at moving in both ways. Trouble doesn't always happen in convenient 6-hour windows. Do knights use a lot of word chains? Yes, chaotic environments can reduce their efficacy, so depending on the situation, a large number of casts might be necessary to gain the desired benefit. It's often worth it, but not always. Peace of Mind worked well on Thagund. That's not the kind of chaotic environment I mean, and Thagund is populated by Artonans. That makes a difference. The cottage had brightened with the arrival of morning, and the suitcase on the floor between them had revealed the full glory of its patch job. Most of the rips and gouges were small, since a certain Riebit preferred to make sure the whole bag received her attentions, rather than committing to the total destruction of any single part. And now they were all repaired with a silver fabric that looked like it had melted into place to fit the holes, rather than being stitched. Stuart had been planning to turn it all blue to match the suitcase, but Alden had stopped him. His eyes fell on a silver bite mark while he reached for another piece of fruit from the bowl of welcome. He was pretty sure the one that tasted like a mild pear was going to be good, while under the effects of the word chain. There are so many things I don't know. Do you want to know more about word chains and chaos fields? No, I still have a few questions about mind healing. I know I need to go soon, but you don't have to go. I probably shouldn't be late, especially since I don't know how many sessions I might need with the healer, and those could take away from school too. How many do you think it might take to make Thagund nightmares go away? That's a question that would be better for the healer, but in my experience... You're late. And he's not in his uniform. I thought he was going to skip class. He's just scared to face me in battle, Astrid announced to the other girls who were standing around in the corridor in front of the locker rooms. She sprang toward Alden and punched the air with a vicious expression that was undermined by her cotton candy pink lipstick and eyeshadow. Actually, that might not be makeup. That might be a new morph. I'm not late yet! Alden dodged around her, easily thanks to the word chain. His duffel bag full of gym supplies was over his shoulder, and his face felt chapped from his high-speed flight here aboard the Nonagon. It had been waiting for him at Matadero's helipad, and a message from Mesherdy telling him to use it if he wanted had appeared as soon as Alden arrived in the cube's teleportation area. I can dress in 3 minutes, but you only have 2 minutes and 15 seconds, Vandy told him. He rushed through the group of girls so fast that he was already a couple of steps inside the locker room by the time he realized Astrid's teeth had been pointy. Nice teeth, he called as the door shut behind him. All the better to beat you with! There weren't that many guys lingering inside, and they were all in their suits already. No, never met him, Finlay was saying to Con. I did hear all about him in intake a couple of times right before I left, but that was all. Alden, was that Astrid you were yelling with? Con asked. He was tousling his hair while he observed himself in one of the mirrors. What's she done to her teeth? The weird emphasis on some of the words made Alden suspect he was still having trouble with pronunciation. They're sharp now, Alden answered. Where have you been? Lexi was waiting for Haoyu to finish tying his shoes. He had Ryther in his hand, and the end was twitching toward Ignacio. Alden was sure it was innocent enough, but it did make Lexi look like he was planning terrible things for the other Meister, who was staring at his knife collection while he put on his wrist cuffs. Hello, Lexi, said Alden as he dove into a shower. I missed you too, your warm smile, your whip, your tone of suspicion. You got your foot fixed, Haoyu called? Alden stripped off his shirt. I got permission to take the boot off, and a lecture about my diet and my badness as a patient, and the healer sent the school a note saying I couldn't come to class if the gym suit was set to punish me for running and jumping with that leg. It had been about 2 hours since he teleported from Rapport 1 to Matadero. He still wasn't quite over the shock of transitioning from an informative, calm, and very mature-feeling conversation with Stuart about his options for mind healing and how the appointments could be handled, to Portiloth. The wizard had been waiting to catch Alden as soon as he arrived and check that he'd behaved himself while he was away. Punish? Asked Haoyu. You'll have a movement restriction? Ignacio asked in Spanish. Alden was surprised he was jumping into the conversation. I was going to duel against you differently, but if you can't run... Alden actually wasn't sure what Paul T. Loth had meant. He just griped a lot about the fact that Alden was unable to follow the very simple instructions he'd been given to eat foods native to Earth. But I ate an Earth-based lunch the day I left had not been a good enough excuse, nor had I honestly forgot so much has been going on. Yeah, he said, reaching for his gym suit. A movement restriction is probably the penalty he had in mind. By the time he exited the stall, the room was empty. He hurried out and ended up entering the gym a step behind Tuyette, who was looking tired. If we duel each other, do you have another bandage for me? Alden asked. He didn't know her well enough to think of a joke about anything else. Alden, she said, did you know him too? That seemed like a random question. Had he missed something? Know who? She frowned. The SAL member who Orpheus Velra sold the submerger to. The person Maricel left class on Friday to warn Skyseaguard about. Alden's thoughts had to run a whole marathon before those two sentences made sense. By the time they got to the finish line, the floor-on warning was flashing on his interface, and he and Tuyette were headed for their classmates and instructors. It was only Klein, Marion, and Wu today. No, he managed to say in the final seconds before class officially began. Didn't know the guy. All right, Instructor Klein said. I hope you all did your homework. Alden looked around at all the faces. Everyone had managed to make it to class except for Maricel. So, she's the student who's taking time off. And the guy she asked me to talk to when we were standing outside the mall, the runaway who took a boat that night, crashed the sinker sender into Matadero. He wondered how he ought to feel about that. Really sorry for Maricel. Nothing personal beyond that, I suppose. Having a few less degrees of separation from a guilty party than he would have expected was unsettling, but he was already roommates with Ludwig von Nutmeg. There just aren't that many human avowed. Most of us are probably only a friend of a friend away from any insane thing that happens with another one of us. He'd watch the news later, figure out what he'd missed, and stop by to check on Maricel. Class first. One-on-ones were conceptually simple. Everyone was supposed to stand in their assigned dueling blocks and complete an objective before the timer ran out. The objectives this time would be the two most basic. Both duelists would be told to fight head-to-head until one was incapacitated, or they'd be assigned to play a simple territory-claiming game. Opponents would be randomized at first, and then the instructors would be adjusting the pairings to make sure that nobody was fighting the exact same class or rank every time. Mehdi raised his hand. Are we going to have a duel scoreboard like the other classes? 1 point per win? Yes, said Heloisa. No, Klein said. Not in this course. But realism is set to movement restriction only for today and Friday, Klein went on. There was a buzz of excitement at that. If nothing hurt at all, then getting thrown across the gym by someone else could be fun. It depended on who the someone else was and how scared you were of their particular method of doing harm. Usually we don't do pain-free duels until the last class of term, as a reward. But this has been a rough week. Don't use it as an excuse to play around. Instead of pain, you get research. On Monday, you have to turn in a write-up about all your injuries. Instructions for that are in your inboxes. Kohn and Soren, you two won't be dueling this week. You've both discovered new features of your powers that you need to figure out in a safe environment. He paused. Normally, I would congratulate you on your progress, but in your cases... Well, we're low on faculty, so you're working on your own today. Soren, you'll be shaping until you can repeat your accident and understand what caused it. Setting yourself on fire isn't something that should happen in the future. Kohn, we've modified some of the ton weights for you. You'll be moving them, without hitting yourself in the face. You're lucky you didn't break your own neck on Friday. Soren reddened. Kohn beamed like he'd been complimented instead of criticized. Lexi shook his head. Alden was privately mourning the loss of two opponents he was interested in having matches against. We'll be running 5 to 10 dueling blocks all the time, and when you're not in one, you can use the practice area over there to figure out what went wrong, what went right, and what you might want to try in your next fight. Instructor Klein gestured to the far end of the gym, where the floor had already been marked off with lines. If you exhaust your body or your main talent during duels, you'll be out. You can choose to observe from the bleachers, or, if you've got something that's still worthy of testing on the floor, you can do that in the practice area. If your temper gets the best of you and you continue attacking another student after the time call, you get to run laps around the track all by yourself, until I have time to come and talk to you. which should be around 9 o'clock tonight, after I've had my supper. Alden looked around, trying to guess if anyone might end up in that unenviable position. His eyes skimmed past Winston, who was wearing a red sweatband on his head that said, "Need a healing?" What does that mean? Is it his latest hero motto, or is it smack talk just for today? Marcia's hand lifted. When Klein nodded at her, she asked, "Why can't we do S versus S and A versus A?" Hao-Yu, standing just in front of Alden, turned around and rolled his eyes so dramatically that even Tuyet smiled. "Because there's value in learning from all your classmates," said Klein. "We'll mix things up in future sessions. Now, let's get started." Their first assignment popped up, and the whole class burst into chatter. "Vandy!" shouted Hao-Yu, waving at her excitedly. "I've got Max," said Lexi. "It's me and Olive." Tuyet was wiping at her interface. "That's good, she's nice." Olive looked less than thrilled. Alden hadn't been assigned to an opponent yet, so he jogged toward the practice area. "Walk, Alden!" He halted, then waved at Klein in acknowledgement. Marcia passed by him, irritation apparent in her every stride. Her polearm, in glaive mode, was propped on one shoulder, looking as deadly as usual, and Jupiter was trotting beside her, carrying a single fist-sized cactus in a pot. Is she going to fight with that? Alden wondered. It was a cactus, but it was so petite compared to her usual choices. Maybe it wouldn't be bad to fight her, since she didn't bring a whole hedge or a tree with her. "These were almost free because the store flooded," Jupiter said to Marcia. "I bought 40 of them." Never mind, she's planning to be a cactus pitching machine. That's still not as bad as some of the other options. She only sent a few at a time. Marcia turned around to glare back at the pairs who were starting their duels. It's not fair. Maybe there's value in fighting some of the A's, but for most of them, for this kind of dueling, I might as well chop wood. Max and I are so invisible to her, she's not even mentioning our rank. Alden wanted to do a Hao-Yu style eye roll at her, but he held back the impulse. He needed to focus on what he'd be doing today. When he reached the practice area, he claimed a spot for himself, where he didn't think he'd be in anyone else's way, dropped his duffel bag on the floor, and bent to search through it. He was way less prepared than usual. His internal clock was confused, he smelled like one of the soaps he bathed with at the cottage, and his combat plans were currently all the same ideas he'd had before the obstacle course last week. On top of that, he had no idea who he'd be up against. I'm allowed to have string or rope, something to weight the ends, and the elemental bags if I want them, and my temper spheres. Too bad he was fighting Avowed instead of Jatontan pests. With a restriction on running, and if it's just me versus one of them, what do I want to practice? Today, the dueling blocks were going to be empty rooms of varying size. No obstacles of any kind for him to work with or hide behind. Alden started examining the other people in the class one by one. I can't plan something that would be good versus everyone. Maybe I should just guess and plan with one of them in mind? Hope whoever I come up with transfers to the others? Heloisa, Jupiter, Reinhard. Reinhard? Okay, him. I owe him back for combat assessment anyway. Let's figure out a way to beat Reinhard. I'll boldly feed him to victory instead of going for a tie. Nothing in Alden's bag of supplies was really screaming victory, though. Not dying did seem doable, partly because of Reinhardt's personality. He probably wouldn't fire his strongest shot at Alden. Power built up on his bow every time he hit his target, and then he sacrificed that magic all in one go for a big one. But he would be conservative with the big ones because he wanted to shoot the strongest members of the class with them, not the rabbit. If he killed Alden that way and he got assigned to duel one of the S's immediately afterwards, he wouldn't be happy. He would absolutely take a draw against me and use me to build up steam so that he could try to beat someone he respected more. Snatching an arrow out of the air with his skill and firing it back at Reinhard would be the coolest option. We're not there yet even with the word chain. Save that for last-ditch efforts. 10 minutes later, when his turn came, Alden had made a plan. Can I call it that? It's not really good enough to be a plan. It's a theory about how I could attract Reinhard if I had nothing but lots of string for a weapon. No, not even a theory. It's a notion we're going to try. And, oh boy, look who I'm fighting with my notion. Dueling Block 3. Opponent, Jeffy, Aquatic Brute, S. Incapacitate your opponent. Kills allowed. He had only 1 minute to get into position, so he thanked Jupiter for being his instructor, picked up his notion, and speed walked toward the block with it. Alden, Instructor Marion said, looking up to take in his weapon of choice as he passed. The engaging with the unexpected teacher had his brown hair pulled back in its usual low ponytail. It didn't take long to make, said Alden, worried he was about to be told that his creation was too much of a creation. I could manage it in, not an emergency maybe, but in an urgency it would be doable. I was just going to tell you to be mindful of your injuries, Marianne said. He was still staring at the archer-defeating basket Alden had made, though. The quick bird nest shield method. Just take all the ribbon, paracord, fishing line, and other lightweight string you bought, and then scramble it into a pile of the desired size and shape before preserving. No tying, minimal fiddling around. If you had a little extra time, you could make sure there were no large gaps, and if you had a convenient largish object handy, like the mounds of elemental bags in the practice area, you could drape your scramble over it to make an easy basket shape. Then you could give it a long handle and preserve the whole situation. The basket was around the size of a small pair of sofas stacked on top of each other. The handle was nylon webbing about 6 yards long that Alden was currently holding much closer to the basket part than the tip because it was too unwieldy. Ideally, he would have run at Reinhard with it and dropped it onto his head. The crazy mess of net would stop a couple of quickly fired arrows while he closed distance, and then, assuming that Alden lost preservation when he trapped his foe, all the crap would still get tangled up with the archer's bow and arrows, for at least a moment. Reinhard would be very pissed, he'd throw it all off, and then Alden would try the final part of the plan. Reinhard would naturally end up stepping on top of the remains of the basket when he freed himself. Most of those strands would still be connected to the handle. Then I represerve, lift, and hurl him as hard as I can. He'll smash into one of the barriers. Definitely he'll be injured, and if he's not completely unconscious, I stab him with one of his own arrows or something. He didn't know how good his chances of making it work were, but it would have been a real fun way of winning. Maybe it will work on Jeffy, too. Alden! Alden, guess what? His mohawked opponent was waving both arms when Alden stepped onto the block. Hi, Jeffy, what? The system says I'm 2 levels stronger overall now, Jeffy started to walk towards him. Everyone remember to start on your own side of the dueling block, Marion called. Jeffy sprang forward. I also got a lamp! Alden knew all of that already, but he was glad the guy was excited. He stared at Jeffy through a narrow gap in his basket, then he turned his new tool sideways, so that the basket was to his left and the handle extended out to his right. The block they'd been assigned was 10 by 25 meters. If Alden stood with his back to the barrier in the start position, he couldn't hold the basket directly in front of him. The handle was way too much, unless he extended it out towards Jeffy. He didn't think there was actually an established dueling rule for holding your 6-yard-long human hurling device, but he was sure someone would say something to him about it if he was bold enough to start with his weapon already a quarter of the way toward his opponent's end of the block. I heard you were working really hard during the disaster, he said to Jeffy. That's awesome, man. You should be proud. Duel timer, 2 minutes. Start in 5 seconds. Alden took a deep breath and let it out. Nerves. Just a little. One-on-one duels at Sleyca North. Let's see what this is like. Fractured ribs. Well, fuck. Fractured ribs. Jeffy, Alden said. Let me... He's a tricky rabbit. Gotta hold him real tight for 60 more seconds, Jeffy said in Alden's ear. Put me down, Alden pried at the arm wrapped around his chest. Get the job done. Aqua brutes have the strength and wisdom of the ocean. I think I would feel better right now if I were in physical pain. Jeffy had started his attack by bellowing, Land moves! And baseball sliding across the floor at high speed. Alden had been proud of himself for about a second. Despite the unexpected method of attack Jeffy had chosen, Alden had gotten his basket in between the two of them to intercept before the brute reached him, only for Jeffy to shout, Sky moves! Mid-slide, and somehow lever his stupidly strong ass up and over the basket. He'd hit the floor at what looked like a spine-breaking angle, but apparently it wasn't, because he sprang right back up and bounded forward to grab Alden. A word chain that helped you move better would save you if you couldn't predict Jeffy's randomness, wouldn't save you if you couldn't predict Jeffy's randomness fast enough. And now this. Instead of killing Alden, Jeffy was bear hugging him from behind. The brute had bent himself backwards so that Alden's feet wouldn't touch the ground. He had failed to trap Alden's arms, so Alden could freely wave all 4 of his limbs helplessly in the air, while an unmovable Jeffy slowly caved his ribs in and said everything in his head out loud. Max says not to overthink, Jeffy chanted. Instead, overdo! I should yield. You look stuck there, Alden, Instructor Marion shouted. Perhaps you'd like to concede? No! I'm still thinking! He kicked his feet. He waved his arms. He still had a grip on his basket handle when he'd first been picked up, but whacking Jeffy in the head with the end of it did absolutely nothing. 60 seconds later, Jeffy set him down. Alden was breathing hard. He reminded himself that Jeffy wasn't a deliberate jerk, and him going on about the strength and wisdom of the ocean while Alden flailed wasn't some kind of insult. Good fight! Jeffy held his hands up for a high five. Wow, your face got red. You... Alden took a deep breath, let it out, then slapped his hand. Yeah. Good fight. The overdoing is working for you. Dueling Block 6. Opponent, Njeri, Shaper of Water, A. Claim your opponent's territory by tagging all of the marked locations on their half of the block. Kills disallowed. This doesn't seem fair if you're not allowed to run today, said Njeri, staring at the red squares on Alden's half of the block. The jumbo water jugs she'd overturned were spilling their contents onto the floor. I'll just do my best. She lifted her hands, and the water began to form a blob in front of her. But your shield is a net. This is unfortunate against a water shaper. Maybe I'll get Reinhard next time. Dueling Block 3. Opponent, Marsha, Meister of the Mutable Haft, S. Incapacitate your opponent. Kills allowed. Just hold out for 10 seconds, thought Alden. He ditched the handle, and he was holding the big bird's nest shield directly in front of him with both hands. It covered his whole body and then some. Versus several members of the class with his back to the barrier, this would be enough to ensure a draw. Versus Marsha, 10 seconds would be a triumph. Start in 5 seconds. How to make it last that long against her? Throw myself towards her as soon as we start, using the good foot so nobody can complain. She won't be expecting that from me. As soon as I land, I'll jump to the left as hard as I can. Zigzag around like crazy. At least 10 seconds, then I'll find out what it feels like to take one of her hits with my skill. He wanted to know that, and this was his first opportunity. The polearm was still in its glaive shape. She would probably just run straight at him as soon as they started, and swing it. 1 sec. Start! Alden bent his knees to throw himself towards her. A sense of threat to the space he occupied, a flash of light. No! His fingers tightened on the shield. For the briefest instant there was a detectable battle, the authority of his skill to bear and preserve, resisting the attack of someone whose power was bound for the creation of an offensive strike. Then Alden was standing there holding 2 fistfuls of severed cord and string. His skill was toast. An injury list that could have been abbreviated as very dead appeared. He looked across the dueling block at Marsha. She hadn't come toward him after all. She just swung her weapon from over there, trusting that the magical follow-up slash would finish him. Chopping wood, she muttered, stalking off. So, thought Alden as he watched her go, this is what duels are going to be like. He was the second person to head to the bleachers. Olive was there, sitting with her arms wrapped around her knees and a jacket draped over her like a tent. The posture and the puffiness around her eyes made Alden think the illusionist wasn't in the mood for company. He went past her and found a seat high enough to provide a good view of all the blocks. Should have expected this. When having one big skill was your style, and that skill was tired, you didn't have anything to fall back on. Guess I could have told Klein I wanted to keep going till I'd run out of temper sphere uses. The look on his face might have been worth it. He stared down at the current batch of duelists. Max and Astrid were just standing in their block, watching each other, with tight postures. Alden assumed the problem was that Astrid knew Max had put down a trap, and she was trying to guess where it was. The skill that went with Max's zone spells was one that let him adjust the effects of the zones had on him. It was reduction only at this point, but that meant he could walk around in the middle of one of the traps and fool people into thinking it was a normal floor. In the neighboring block, Reinhard versus Haoyu wasn't going well for Reinhard. He ran faster than Haoyu, but not when he was shooting at the same time. Haoyu had him in a chokehold already, and would be winning any second. There was still over an hour left of class. I have 13 more classes until the end of term, maximum. We'll probably be dueling in a lot of them. How should I handle it? Ryther plunged into the back of the brute who just grabbed Lexi. Should I try to figure out how to beat each classmate? The seal had the object shaper pinned to the floor. She looked apologetic about it. No, let's stick with the plan. I'm here to learn, practice, and grow the skill, so if I leave a fight having done that, it's a personal win. And if I don't get anything out of it, it's a loss. He looked down at Marcia. No taking her hits like that again this turn. He understood what it was like now. There was nothing else to be gained from a repeat. I also can't outrun her without a ground element surface, so she's absolutely no good for practicing defense against in a battlefield like the one we just had. Next time, I'll try out something offensive. Okay, so if she's going to stand in place and chop wood like that whenever we fight, I might as well use her to practice hitting hard and fast from range. Getting my aim down might take a while, but how fast can I make something on the end of a straight fly if I have, let's say, a minute to prep in the practice area in advance? He considered it for a couple of minutes, then he put the problem aside and studied the fights going on in front of him. The outcomes were usually predictable. He wasn't surprised by where the gaps between his classmates were, but witnessing the width of those gaps in this kind of scenario was brutal. Everyone had been freed of the need to think about delicate rescue operations, strategy, and complicated rules. The S-ranks looked like monsters, and the S-rank meisters looked like monsters that ate the other monsters for breakfast. Tuyet, Marcia, and Ignacio didn't lose against anyone except each other. Alden didn't see Finlay fight Ignacio, but Tuyet got the speedster by throwing all of her darts at once, and Marcia just barely beat him in a difficult-to-follow close combat situation. Alden was going to have to watch that one in slow motion. He thought Finlay's mistake might have been positioning himself between her and the place where the polearm had fallen to the floor. S-rank weapons meisters were generally the killingest of killing machines. Most of them lacked the flexibility and creative options that shapers and adjusters had. They weren't given as many foundation points as brutes. What they had were magic weapons and the talents they needed to make those weapons extremely dangerous. So their dominance today was to be expected. It was to be expected, but a lot of people, including the members of class who had seemed the most eager for duels, were acting like they hadn't expected it. The obstacle course didn't make it as stark as this, Alden thought as he watched a boy stalk away from his duel with Ignacio. He turned back to say something that made Klein bark a warning. The tempers were getting hot in the A-on-A fights as well. Jerry was running on the track. Her competitive streak had gotten the better of her during a fight with Heloisa, and she'd launched a jet of water at her roommate after time was called. Hadn't seemed like she was really angry, just too in battle and unwilling to stop mid-attack. She looked mortified to be sent off to do laps. As time passed, spell impressions wore out, skills wore out. A few of the brutes got tired and clumsy, and Klein ordered them off the floor. A couple of people went to use the bathroom and never came back. The smarter ones just had private breakdowns in their seats. People in this program get very upset about losing, Alden said when Lexi, wearing a towel around his neck and moving like he was exhausted, finally joined him on the bleachers. He'd done well, and he looked satisfied. That's probably the equivalent of an average person wearing a giant grin. Lexi drained a water bottle in a few gulps. How did you do? He asked. How's you? I haven't been able to pay attention to anything but my own fights since I started. Marcia butchered my magic and my body, said Alden. Hao-Yu hasn't been winning as much as you. Some people have started running from him to force draws, but he's going to be the last A-rank standing. Lexi looked down at the floor, then sat up straighter at the sight of Hao-Yu's current opponent. Everly's still in it? Not really. She's been on a losing streak for a while, and she can't run at all anymore. She just wobbles around the block until she gets killed or manages a spell cast. But when Marian tried to tell her she could quit, she shouted that she had been careful and saved her impressions and that this was her gym time. The instructor had seemed a little concerned, but he'd let her go on with it. After a minute, Lexi said, The bridge really bothered her. It should bother us all, of course, but she's got Cone asking me for running tips, like I'm some expert on training just because I exercise in the mornings. Why didn't she just ask you herself? Lexi frowned. I don't know. It's not like I'm that hard to talk to. Alden clamped his mouth shut and focused on Jupiter. She and Vandy had agreed to have a shaping-only duel. They were each sitting on the floor while a ball of smashed cacti and a current of air clashed in the middle of her block. She blinded 3 people. What? Jupiter, with her cactus bomb. Alden watched the green ball creep a little closer to Vandy. She aims for the face.